Week 13 of the fantasy football season, and when most deadlines up a few weeks ago, and this week, the last week to trade in most fantasy leagues, here's a few plays I look to sell and trade this week. The first guy, Kyren Williams. Los Angeles Rams to Kyren Williams. We know he missed 4 games with injury, and week 12, what a monster game it was for him in his return. 16 carries, 143 rush yards, 6 catches, 61 yards, 2 receiving touchdowns in that one. So week 13, a tough matchup versus the Browns. Every week this offense isn't going to be as explosive as it was in that game in Arizona. Even though Kyren Williams, he was having a great year before he got hurt in the middle weeks. He's still a running back I will look to sell and trade this week. And right now, while he's at peak value, looking healthy and coming off a monster game with 38 fantasy points in PPR leagues, this is a perfect time to sell him high because I know he's going to have some good games, but there's some games as well we saw early in the season where he's only scoring 7-8 fantasy points as well. The next guy, Gabe Davis of the Buffalo Bills. So Gabe Davis, every once in a while, he has a big ball game, and they definitely had that in week 12 in a tough loss in overtime in Philly. 6 catches, 105 yards and a touchdown on 12 targets. And he could add another touchdown that left out there to win the ball game. But him and Allen were off course on that play at the end of the game. So Gabe Davis, he's the definition of a boom or bust wide receiver. And for the most part, he hasn't done much in the last month. Week 9, it's Cincinnati, a goose egg. Week 10 versus Denver, 2 catches, 56 yards. Week 11 versus the Jets, a goose egg again. And then week 12, like I mentioned, the big game at the Philadelphia Eagles. But like I said, Gabe Davis, he has these pop games once in a while. And right now, while he's coming off a pop game and going to a bye week, if you just could get anything of decency, this would be a perfect time, in my opinion, to sell him off this week. The next play is Najee Harris of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Najee Harris, when you think he's down and he's not going to do much for fantasy owners, he comes back with a nice ball game. So Harris, the last few weeks here, he's actually been pretty decent with double-digit fantasy games in the last 4 out of 5 weeks. Week 10 versus Green Bay, 16 carries, 82 yards, a touch, 3 catches, 14 yards. Week 11 at Cleveland in that one, 12 carries, 35 yards, a catch, a yard. And week 12 at Cincinnati, 15 carries, 99 yards, and a touchdown. So all that talk, Jaylen Warren's going to take over 100% and be the starter. Obviously, that hasn't happened. Harris is still getting his 12, 15 touches per game in between the tackles and at the goal line. And once again, we saw him have a decent game. But obviously, the explosiveness isn't great here for Najee Harris. I know new offensive coordinator in there for this Pittsburgh Steelers team, but I don't really think it's going to make a difference. So after he's coming off a pop game and has a good matchup here in Week 13 versus Arizona, he's a perfect sell-high play this week. Next play is Deebo Samuel of the San Francisco 49ers. So Deebo Samuel, no doubt about it, he's a great talent. He's a playmaker. You can line him up anywhere. But also, he's a player that, as well, has a lot of injury concerns throughout his career. And right now, while things are going good over the last 3 weeks since he returned from injury as Deebo, this is a perfect time to sell him off. Week 10 at Jacksonville in that game, 4 catches, 30 yards, 3 carries, 29 yards, a touchdown. Week 11 versus Tampa, carry -1 yards, 3 catches, 63 yards. And week 12 at Seattle on Thursday night last week, 4 carries, 15 yards, a touchdown, 7 catches, 79 yards. So playing great football, like I said, since he returned from injury. But I'm waiting for that other shoe to drop once again for Deebo Samuel here. So right now, Deebo, while he's playing good football and he's looking healthy right now, this is a perfect time to sell him high because I still think Brandon Ayuk is the number 1 guy over there. And I just can't count on Deebo staying healthy the remainder of the season. Next sells Jamar Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals. Jamar Chase, he had a decent performance in the first full game with Jake Browning at quarterback in Week 12 versus Pittsburgh. 4 catches, 81 yards. And for the most part, I think if he's not getting a touchdown, is Jamar Chase. His fantasy outlook's only going to be 12, 15 fantasy points. Obviously, still decent numbers, but obviously not number 1 elite numbers where you drafted Jamar Chase. But with Joe Burrow out for the season, that's the best they're going to do at this point of the year with Jake Browning. So Week 13, a decent matchup at the Jacksonville Jaguars. But like I said, I don't think for the remainder of the season we're going to see much out of Jamar Chase. Early in the year, he got off to a slow start and then had some pop games as well. But right now, while Joe Burrow's out for the season, and I don't think Chase has much of a ceiling besides 12, 15 fantasy points. He's a sell high this week. Next sells Dak Prescott of the Dallas Cowboys. So Dak Prescott, the last month of the season, he's been the best quarterback in fantasy football in terms of putting up points. Is Dak Prescott, where he's had 4 games, 30 or more fantasy points in the last 5. So Dak's going out there. He's playing great football. This Cowboy team, a lot of confidence, a lot of big plays. CeeDee Lamb, one of the best receivers and breakout receivers this season. Week 10 versus the Giants, 404 pass yards, 4 touchdowns. Unintel, 2 carries, 17 yards of rushing touchdown. Week 11 at Carolina, 189 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, 6 rush yards. And Week 12 versus the Commanders, he destroyed them, 331 pass yards, 4 touchdowns, and 10 rush yards. So right now, Dak Prescott, the last 3 weeks here, he's been a man on a mission. Is Prescott in that time where he's just going out there and he's making it look easy with 11 touchdowns in the last 3 games, but the schedule definitely gets tougher for this Dallas Cowboy team with Seattle, Philly, Buffalo, Miami coming up the next few weeks. And I just don't see Dak keeping up these elite numbers, but if he does, he's got a great possibility of winning the MVP. But right now, well, he's playing at a high level, and you pretty much could get 2 plays in the deal for him or start running back or receiver. If a team needs a quarterback, this is a perfect time to sell him high with the deadline up this week everywhere. And the final player I look to sell in trades, Devin Singletary of the Houston Texans. So Devin Singletary, we know he's been a good talent for this Texan team, and he's had some decent years in Buffalo in the last 3 weeks. The numbers are definitely bumped up for Singletary with more work. And Pierce missing Week 10 and 11. Week 10 at Cincinnati, 30 carries, 150 yards, a touchdown, a catch, 11 yards. Week 11 versus Arizona, 22 carries, 112 yards, a touch, 2 catches, 6 yards. And Week 12 versus Jacksonville, 6 carries only though, 18 rush yards, 6 catches, 54 yards. It's still a solid game in PPR, 13.20 fantasy points in that one. But Dameon Pierce back in the lineup, and I don't think Dameon Pierce obviously is going to go away that easy. He only had 1 less carry in that game than Singletary, but obviously Singletary's a better receiver out of the backfield than Dameon Pierce. But anyway, right now, while Singletary's played well over the last 3 weeks, and I still see Pierce getting work, and this being a 50-50 split possibly, I would sell him high. So that's a few plays that look to sell and trade here with the deadline finishing up this week everywhere for fantasy football for Week 13 of the fantasy football season.